Did you know that yearly Medicaid renewals will start again soon? This means millions of people who were enrolled in Medicaid during the pandemic may no longer be eligible for coverage. If this may impact you, the good news is you have options. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield can help answer your questions so you can find an affordable health plan for you and your family. We want you to feel confident you're covered. Click to learn more. Policy exclusions and limitations apply. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield is the trade name of Community Insurance Company.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick. We're here to talk about another That One Play episode. And the play we're talking about today is the sack iconic of Bart Scott on Roethlisberger in the 2006 game in Baltimore. If you were there, you probably have not forgotten this game still. If you're younger and you're just getting an introduction to this, we're happy to do it. This is a great part of Ravens history, a sometimes overlooked season. Often one that is a source of great disappointment for people. But here to talk to me about that is Josh Levine. Josh, how you doing?
Ken, good to be back, and I'm doing great. I'm missing football already.
That's the way it goes. It's an abrupt end, no matter what you get, unless you're the champions.
Unless you win it all, exactly.
All right, and you're at Word of J on Twitter, correct?
That is correct.
Best place to talk football with you?
Love to talk football. Best place to talk football with me. Also have a Facebook page that's Word of Josh. So just for fun, I got to keep the football season going.
All right, outstanding. So let's kind of set the moment up a little bit. So the Ravens are already having a great year. They were 8-2 coming into this game against the Steelers, which was played on November 26th. It was that Thanksgiving weekend, and the Steelers were not. They were coming off a Super Bowl hangover, effectively. They won it all in 2005 with a team that wasn't all that great, but they did manage to slip by the Seahawks in the championship. I think they won their last. They might have been. I'm trying to remember whether it was 7-5 and then won their last 8, something like that.
Yeah, they were 7-5, and then they pretty much went on a win streak to win it all. They got hot at the right time.
They did, just like the 2012 Ravens would, but this Steelers team, not nearly in the same place. And it is interesting because they had won very impressively, but they'd lost some very close games. And the Ravens dealt them really the two biggest thumpings of the season. They took 27-0 in Baltimore. And then when the Steelers had amazingly clawed their way back into it, they got destroyed 31-7 in Pittsburgh, and two of the biggest beatings that the Ravens have ever administered to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, this season has so many memories for me with that series because I was lucky enough to go to both games and witness both of them. So I've had season tickets for 2 decades at this point, but that was my first visit to Pittsburgh for a Ravens Steelers game, and to really walk in there and just thump them at their home stadium was great. But we'll talk about that on another day because this game was something special back in 2006, and the play that we're talking about particular it's still to this day brings so many warm feelings to my heart for so many different reasons.
Well, Bart Scott, of course, the protagonist, and what an opportunistic pass rusher he was, particularly in that 2006 season. I think he ended up with 9 sacks or 9.5 or whatever it was. But as a weak side linebacker, he was just finding a place. He was not, generally speaking, rushing as a down lineman or part of any kind of 4-2-5 scheme where he'd be up front. He'd have been in there and just taking advantage of what else was going on. Had some fantastic underneath players, and particularly Trevor Pryce as an interior defender who I think led the team in sacks.
He did. I think he had about 13 that year.
And definitely was a little like Calais Campbell in terms of his length, and anytime he crossed the face of a guard would cause a problem that had to be corrected. And those Ravens with Adelius Thomas and Bart Scott, and I'm forgetting somebody else who had a bunch of sacks as well.
Sizzle,
right there you go. Sucks. Yeah. Always are we're creating problems for opponents. It's the best 4-man sack pack the Ravens have ever had, and still their sack record for a single season.
Yeah, yeah, and a really nice group because they were, Bart Scott really thrived under that Rex Ryan system, which is probably part of the reason he followed Rex up to New York a few years later. But Rex really, I mean, if there's a family in football that understands rushing the passer, it certainly is the Ryan family. And for as much credit as Buddy Ryan gets, justifiably, I think Rex really took things to the next level. And using players like Adalys Thomas, like Bart Scott, and even not necessarily resurrecting Trevor Pryce, but really getting that much production out of Trevor Pryce at a latter stage of his career was certainly pretty special. And as you said, the amount of sacks this group put together, throw Terrell Suggs in there, throw in the rookie Haloti Ngata, a lot of special things with this defense. And comes back to this sack in particular.
Outstanding talent, to be sure. So let's talk about this play in particular, because the Ravens had just gone up 14-0, and the game was certainly starting to get out of hand. And you certainly expected the Ravens of that era to hold a 14-point lead. 3:31 to go, 2nd and 8 from their own 14. Tell us a little bit about the play itself.
I think what's so unique about this play is when you look at it, it kind of starts out as more of your traditional 3-4 look. If you look at how the Ravens break the huddle, Bart Scott comes out in more of that inside linebacker position, and then he shifts over to that left outside linebacker spot. And Rex Ryan was known for a lot of this during his time. I believe they referred to it as disorganized chaos.
Organized chaos.
I always called it disorganized chaos, but that's because I was coaching in high school at the time and the players just didn't know where to line up. It was around the same time, but nonetheless, organized chaos. And Bart, comes out in that inside linebacker look. They do a shift. And as you look at the setup right before the ball is snapped, you do have Ray Lewis manning the inside. One of the safeties cheats up. I can't remember if it was Ed Reed or if it was Corey Ivy or someone, or Laron Landry. But when Bart Scott goes on the outside, no one really takes him into account. And he blitzes hard off the edge and comes in untouched. And Willie Parker, who was the running back, I'm still fascinated if this was a blown assignment or just the perfect call against the Steelers' protection, because Willie Parker never looks to the outside. He looks inside first. And by the time he realized Bart Scott was coming, it was too late. Bart literally decapitated Roethlisberger with what would still be a clean hit today. There was nothing dirty about this hit. It was just off the edge, untouched. Roethlisberger never saw him coming, and Bart Scott decleated him. And Ben Roethlisberger is not an easy quarterback to decleat. Ben was horizontal and landed flat on his back and did not get up right away. And, for as much as we all love to hate Ben, to say that he wasn't tough, there were times we like to say that Ben wasn't tough, but Ben was pretty tough, and he was tough to bring down. And Bart Scott just got him with what we called the sack heard around the bank. I mean, he really got him, and Ben stayed down. The game stopped because Ben had to come out.
I had not recalled the sack heard around the bank, and he did come back into that game, and I think probably unwisely played for much more time. They kept him in all the way to the end of the game because the Ravens eventually secured the shutout on I think a 4th and 22 play where he's still in the ball game. So it's a odd situation where Tomlin just said, I really want to make sure he knows the proper amount of toughness or whatever. But they all had to go in there and take some licks that day.
Did you know that yearly Medicaid renewals will start again soon? This means millions of people who were enrolled in Medicaid during the pandemic may no longer be eligible for coverage. If this may impact you, the good news is you have options. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield can help answer your questions so you can find an affordable health plan for you and your family. We want you to feel confident you're covered. Click to learn more. Policy exclusions and limitations apply. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield is the trade name of Community Insurance Company.
Obviously, it was a one-sided contest, and certainly one where the Ravens fans just couldn't stop screaming. It was a great game. And they had not started out that quickly in terms of sacks. I mean, this was only the third of what would be a team record 9 sacks that day.
Yeah, and this one meant so much. The stadium was electric from the opening snap. The Steelers weren't having much success moving the ball. They tried to stick with the run game. The Ravens got out to that lead. And like you said, this was the third sack, but this one it changed, in my opinion, it changed everything for this defense. It really cemented the return of that Ravens swagger from the 2000-2001 defense, where it was, you're not moving the ball against us. And this was the defending Super Bowl champs. Say what you want about their record. They had, really, dominated the series for the last 3 head-to-head games. And Baltimore really just came in and said, all right, that's done. And Bart Scott cemented it. Everything changed in that stadium once that hit happened. Ben was down, like I said. It took him a while to even get up and get off the field. Like you said, he came back in, but probably unwise to do so.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, the unusual thing about the sack was for how long he was just off the ground entirely. He wasn't just knocked down the way a lot of sacks down, or dragged down, or even hit down in some way, which that can be pretty violent sometimes. He was actually, taken off his feet, gone airborne momentarily. Yep. And you mentioned that it probably would not have been called roughing the passer today. I think you're right. But one of the things that Scott did was make sure that the full force of his body came down on top of Roethlisberger on that play. So that was the element that might have been called today in terms of, we get some terrible roughing the passer calls now. Just can't stand them.
It's changing the game and not for the better. And I do agree with you. I think the one discussion, had that been flagged for that reason, is there's no other way to get Ben off his feet. I mean, Ben was probably easily 260, 270. He was not a small quarterback. And you're right, the way Bart hit him, I mean, he was off his feet. The one thing that I watched closely before we came on is, if you actually watch Ben, I looked closely at his head to see, did his head bounce off the turf? Because we've seen that this season, particularly with Tua down in Miami. Ben's head, while it hit the turf, it certainly didn't look like it hit it hard. Mm-hmm. It looked like the bulk of the hit was really absorbed by Ben's back. And again, just such a violent but clean hit within the rules of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then the Ravens went on from there, of course, in this particular game to roll up 6 more sacks. They'd once before had 9 sacks in a tie against the Eagles in overtime in 1997.
1997, yeah.
And they had 9 sacks again some point, and I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, but then they had 11 against Tennessee in that remarkable game to that
was great.
Beat that. Yeah, that was just one of those things. I hope somebody takes a play from that game, because that'll be that'll be fun. But anything else about the 2006 season and the way this because they became just a sack machine after that. The very next week they sacked Michael Vick 5 times.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this season was it was so much fun because the quarterback play for the last 3 years had really been subpar, unfortunately, with Kyle Bowler. He came in with a lot of hype, but getting Steve McNair and having an offense that really was complementary towards the defense. It wasn't, McNair wasn't putting up the type of numbers that he did when he was the MVP, but you had a confidence that this team could go all the way with Steve McNair. And, once Brian Billick took over the play calling I guess he fired Jim Fossil. He didn't just take over the play calling, but basically Billick put everything on himself and really opened up what this offense was capable of. We had Jamal Lewis, we had Todd Heap. So the offense was taken care of. But you had the defense with Ray Lewis in his prime and Ed Reed in his prime. And Terrell Suggs was still like a baby at this point. I think Terrell was like 23, 20, 4th year and really turning into things. But this team also stayed healthy, so you never felt like there was a weakness with this team.
Yeah, it was one of those amazing seasons that only comes along once in a while. I think you're right. It was kind of a confluence of health and circumstance and a lot of things just going right at the same time. Adalys Thomas was having his greatest year. Trevor Pryce was having certainly his greatest year as a Raven and probably his greatest year of his career. Charles Suggs was good, and it was frankly a complimentary player on this team. Bart Scott had his best year. It's a remarkable set of circumstances. Dwan Landry was a rookie, and he had five picks. And not only that, he allowed Ryan to use these weird outside blitz schemes where he would often is the wrong word, but the previous week it was actually the Atlanta game, and he used Samari Roll to blitz Vic from the outside, and he got a sack in the game. And it's one of these situations where Landry was capable of jumping up and taking coverage on an outside receiver man that would allow for this. Landry also pretty good interceptor of the football during this time with the Ravens, had 5 picks as a rookie. They had a little bit of everything at every level in that defense. It was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and you think about some of the players who we haven't even mentioned. We didn't even mention Chris McAllister yet. He was there. You think about Ed Reed, Corey Ivy, all these guys who could do so many things, and there really wasn't a weak spot anywhere with this defense. I mean, even your backups were really good.
Yeah. They certainly had good backup safeties that played dime, and people would probably point to Corey Ivy at the weakness, and that guy was a whirling dervish. He was just outstanding in terms of what he could do around the line of scrimmage. Very physical player, and had a huge strip sack in this game that we won't get into. But Josh, really appreciate having you on and kind of reliving your memories of that play and how they related to that team. And I think this is always fun to do these kind of things. Anything else you want to hit on before we cut out here?
Just remember how great, what a great season this was for Adalys Thomas. And, I always wondered what would have happened if he would have stayed here the following year. Not so much for the team's success, but I feel like AD is one of those players that's sort of gotten lost in Ravens folklore, if you will, just due to the amount of great defenders we had. But what an amazing season he had playing defense and specials.
Yeah, he deserves even more discussion than that, but we can't do it right now, unfortunately, Josh.
Right.
Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a That One Play episode, hit me up. There's lots of great individual plays open. I put some out on Twitter today. If you want to look over my tweets for the last few days when this comes out, you'll be able to see some that I've suggested in terms of plays that haven't been taken. None of Ed Reed's interceptions have so far been taken, which is incredible.
Wow.
Ray Lewis's interception in the first Ravens game has not yet been taken. So hit me up if you'd like to do one, and you'll be on like Josh. We'll talk for about 15 minutes about the play, and that's the format we're looking to do. Josh, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken. Great to see you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.
Did you know that yearly Medicaid renewals will start again soon? This means millions of people who were enrolled in Medicaid during the pandemic may no longer be eligible for coverage. If this may impact you, the good news is you have options. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield can help answer your questions so you can find an affordable health plan for you and your family. We want you to feel confident you're covered. Click to learn more. Policy exclusions and limitations apply. Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield is the trade name of Community Insurance Company.